Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. I've got another video for you today about some mid-round running back choices. Guys that you're going to be able to pick between rounds 5 and rounds 10 or 11 based on average draft position, and guys that I feel are going to exceed their expected points based on their ADP, guys that are maybe a little bit low on their tier or a tier below where I believe that they should be. And I have a very special guest joining me today for the first time ever on the same podcast, video, stream, whatever. I've got JJ Zachariason, the late round QB. And guess what, guys? He's going to be my lovely co-host today. So JJ, welcome. Say hi to the people.
What's going on, people? I'm very excited. I can't believe it's been this, because we've hung out so many times IRL and we've never done a show together.
It's true. I mean, it was the whole Jets and Sharks situation, but that's over now. So I'm glad to have you here. Obviously, there's going to be some snarky, that's sitting in YouTube comments saying, he's the late round QB. You're not talking about late round QBs. Right. But he is a great football analyst who is going to be able to tell us some things about players. And he's got just every time I listen to his podcasts, whether it's a late round podcast or whether it's Living the Stream, there's always some stat that I didn't think about and an angle, the way that you're looking at things and breaking things down that I didn't think about, that's allowing me a different window into maybe accepting a player that I was not thinking about before. And I know that you've got some great running backs here for us to talk about. Well, some late round running backs, some mid round running backs for us to talk about that might exceed their expectations. So I'm going to start this off with the first one, that this is one of my picks that before we went live, JJ said, you're going to have to convince me about this guy. And I totally understand that. So for me, it's Devin Singletary, who is sitting right now in terms of ADP. He's not sitting very high on the ADP list. Right now, his ADP is around the 23rd running back taken. He is also at an ADP of 49.5, so he just barely fits into my rules here where I wanted to have somebody who is a 5th to 10th round-ish draft pick, so he is sitting there right at the top of the 5th round. But I think he's the last guy that we can count on for volume. And whether you want to say, now, you're a tiers guy, JJ, yes?
Yes, most definitely.
So I'm assuming you have him in the same tier as David Montgomery and not a tier below.
Yeah. I mean, my thing with Singletary is more so the cost and getting him and passing up on some of the wideouts there, as opposed to, I think that where he's ranked as a running back and where you would tier him as a running back makes total sense. My thing is just where, the other wideouts you can be selecting there.
And that's fine. Right. So I'm saying if you're going with like a 0 RB strategy and he's your 5th round running back after you've taken, 2-3 wide receivers, after you've taken a tight end, what if you're going to go get a premium tight end, or if you have the number 1 pick and you've got Christian McCaffrey and then 3 wide receivers, he might be your RB2. And he's the last guy that's going to come in with any sort of volume. From weeks 9 through 16 last year, he came in at 18.9 touches and he had 3.6 targets per game. There is clearly a touchdown possibility of a problem here with Josh Allen running in as many as he does from short yardage and a little bit beyond the 10-yard line. Zach Moss, the rookie that they drafted and spent some draft capital on, being somebody that they've said is going to take over the Frank Gore role in this offense. And Frank Gore had a good amount of inside the 10 carries last year, something that went away from Devin Singletary. But let's say that there's a possibility that Moss takes 50% of the Frank Gore touches inside the 10. That leaves more touches for Singletary inside the 10. And I believe that Singletary had 2 touchdowns in the final 8 weeks of the season last year. If he finds his way to 6, maybe 7 touchdowns on a team that should be better offensively this year than they were last, with the addition of Stephon Diggs. Now John Brown is not their primary wide receiver. He's their secondary guy. Steph Diggs, very capable wide receiver in his own right. The maturation of somebody like Josh Allen. The second year for Devin Singletary being a place where most rookies take a bit of a jump in their second year because they don't have to worry about all the offseason stuff, the combine, the rookie camp, all the other things. They're just focused. And yes, this year is going to be different for second year players than any other year before because of the world situation, because of coronavirus and everything else, that things are going to be a little bit more, not as fluid for them going to mini camps and everything else. But like, it's another year with the playbook in this offense. If he maintains at 19 to 20 touches, if you look at the running backs that go just after him, Cam Akers, not sure we can project comfortably 19 touches per game for him from the jump because A, he's a rookie. B, I don't trust Sean McVay, and Sean McVay has not trusted rookies in his short head coaching career. And there's 3 dudes there. Kareem Hunt, definitely not a 19-touch guy. DeAndre Swift, there's a Kerryon Johnson problem. Mostert might be a guy that gets that many touches. And if he falls based on the things now, I think that he might become of value. Ingram, Dobbins, Damian Williams, Dave Montgomery had his own issues as much as I love David Johnson. I think that Devin Singletary is the pick in this range that makes the most sense. So that's me trying to convince you, JJ, that Singletary in the 5th round, especially if he falls, as he has been falling recently, if he falls to the end of the 5th round, I think he's a great value. I think he's a good value where he is at 5-1.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot more sense in the late 5th and, at that 5-6 turn if he does fall, because I've seen him fall there in some drafts. But, I think that's the right optimistic view for Singletary for sure, where, last season he only had 2 goal line rushes. That's an issue. If he were to maintain that and see that this season, we do have some fear too, because he's a smaller build guy. He has a decent BMI, but he's still a smaller dude in general. And I think that's part of the reason why they wanted to bring on a guy like Zach Moss, who's a bigger bodied back, carried a big workload in college, definitely profiles to be the Frank Gore within that offense. My fear is that, number one, what if Zach Moss is just better than expected, which could absolutely happen. He was fine in my prospect model. He's not someone that I'm like absolutely in love with, but definitely had some good marks within his production profile and in my prospect model. And then the thing with Singletary too is that you have to buy into him being involved fairly heavily as a receiver in the offense. And that's what we saw last year. Really interesting too, because Singletary was not heavily involved as a receiver in college. He actually saw his receiving numbers drop through the years in college. But he was used heavily there last year. If that translates again this year, that's great. My fear a little bit is that you have Stephon Diggs entering the picture, and that, despite the fact that they're not playing the same position, etc., we also know that adding a player like Stephon Diggs, who's going to demand a 23-ish% target share, that's going to alter the target shares of everyone in that offense in some way, because it's an additional good player. Now, you can make the argument like you did, which I think is very valid, that the offense becomes more efficient. And I do think if Singletary ends up seeing a lot more of that within the 10, within the 5 work, very possible that he way outperforms this ADP or outperforms it to a decent degree. My fear is just Zach Moss, and my fear is Singletary not taking on that goal line work given our sample last year. But yeah, I think he's fairly volatile as a result of that, but he should give you a decent enough floor to at least pay off that ADP.
I mean, you can see the ADP that we've got ever since the draft in April, which you kind of see right here. He's fallen way down 10 picks. If he falls another 5-6 picks, he becomes a really good value. As I said, the RB23, volume is king at the running back position if you can get a guy who's going to get volume. And yes, if Zach Moss is just better, he's clearly the better ADP value with upside. But if you're looking for a guy that had volume last year and projects to have it from week 1 on, and you're paying a 5th round price tag, there's no other running backs that can get the volume that somebody like Devin Singletary is going to have. The next guy that I want to talk about is going to be right below him at Kareem Hunt. And it's kind of a similar ADP of 52.5, 26th running back off the board. And the question of, well, what about Nick Chubb? Nick Chubb's going in the 1st round, maybe the early 2nd if he falls. But realistically speaking, last year in the 8 weeks that he played with Nick Chubb in the offense, he still averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game. For this ADP, okay, for the ADP that Kareem Hunt is at, which is a 26th running back overall, you're expecting 123.7 points out of a running back that's being selected there at 12.5 points. At 12.5 points per game, you're looking at a projection of like 201 fantasy points expected for somebody like Kareem Hunt if he's utilized the exact same way that he was last year. Chubb is not somebody that they involve in the passing game in a PPR league or a half PPR league. You're looking at somebody who is going to be very involved. They used both of them on the field at the same time a lot of the time last year, which opens up, to me, an opportunity for value, whether you're going 0 RB, you're drafting as your 2nd or 3rd running back. I think that there's still value here and a great chance for him to exceed his expected points based on his ADP.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too, I did a finding a breakout running back article where I basically looked at running backs over the last decade who far exceeded their ADP by 100 or more points, and looked at traits that those running backs shared. And one of the traits that they shared was that they had a very large disproportionate amount of targets versus attempts within their profile. Kareem Hunt is going to have that. I mean, last year, now look, we should temper expectations a little bit. He's not going to see his prorated 19% target share that he was on pace for last year, more than likely. Yeah. There's a new offense that's a scheme that's going to be in town with Kevin Stefanski taking over. I don't think it's going to be a bad thing for Kareem Hunt. And we're already seeing that he's lining up everywhere, and they want him to line up everywhere, and all the coach speak that's out there about Kareem Hunt's receiving ability. But that's exactly what we need to hear in order to have some confidence in selecting him. The reason why I love Kareem, we know the talent is there for Kareem Hunt. And the reason why he's such a great target is because you're getting that floor with a player like this, especially in a PPR format. But the ceiling is insane, because what happens if Nick Chubb gets banged up? What happens in this pandemic season if Nick Chubb gets coronavirus and he's out for 3 weeks and Kareem Hunt steps in and is he would be an RB1 in fantasy easily.
He'd be a league winner.
So yeah, right. So if anything were to happen to Nick Chubb, all of a sudden Kareem Hunt could be a top 3 running back in fantasy. And that's exactly the kind of path that you want out of the guys in that area of your draft. So to me, Kareem Hunt is a slam dunk pick. Even if he doesn't see the same type of target share that he saw last year, he'll still give you some sort of floor each week in a PPR format. And then, like I said, there's at least a path to ceiling, and that's really what we want to focus on in those middle rounds.
Totally agree. The next guy that I want to talk about is Darius Guice. Now, guys, I know I fall for it every time, and I totally understand if you're not on the Darius Guice train. I get it, okay? I totally get it. You don't need to explain it to me. I know every year that I've said that I like the talent, I'm buying the talent with Darius Guice. He is the 33rd running back being taken, ADP of 74, so coming a couple rounds later than guys like Singletary and Hunt. But he's played 5 games in the last 2 years. Like I'm just gonna get drawn into the rocks again. I love the talent, good usage in the passing game. He has talent in the passing game. Much younger than Adrian Peterson, roughly I think 53 years younger than Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, something like that.
And like
maybe 54.
Months. Maybe 54. I'm rounding down. So I think that he is a very good profile of a very good running back in terms of his workout metrics, in terms of what he's done when he's been on the field. Health is clearly the number one issue. Something that you pointed out in one of your late round podcasts that I'd like for you to talk about is the pace of play of the Washington Redskins. Obviously, if he's healthy and he's going to be that lead volume guy in a very crowded backfield, and they did draft a running back, and they still do have Adrian Peterson, whose ADP has been rising. If Guice is healthy, he's the one that I want for all those reasons, but then the pace of play reason as well.
Yeah, so they have a new coaching staff in Washington, which I don't think should be understated. I think it's a really big deal because last year, Washington, in terms of plays run, overall plays run, which that's what we care about in fantasy football because it's volume. In overall plays run, Washington had the second lowest mark that we've seen, not just last year, not just the last 5 years, but since 2011. So anytime that you're going to see a rise there, natural regression there, I mean, we're talking, they're probably going to run like 70 plus more plays than they did last year. But when that happens, there's obvious value because we know that the way the market thinks and the way that ADP thinks, the way that, us fantasy managers think is we are taking a lot of data from the previous season and a lot of people are extrapolating that data into the next season. And that's why we see ADPs the way they are. And that's why we can pick off different values based on regression, et cetera, et cetera. And so with the Washington offense in general, they should be better, or they should at least run more plays. And if that's the case, it's a good thing for Darius Guice. And I think that the big key with him is going to be how they deploy Antonio Gibson. Gibson coming out as a great pass catching back really could have played wide receiver if he wanted to. But coming out as a pass catcher, he was incredibly efficient at Memphis. So I do have some worry that they end up using him a good bit out of the backfield, but I also think that there's a chance that Gibson plays a lot in the slot and plays a lot lined up wide because he has that versatility. But if he is lined up in the backfield a lot, that could hurt Guice's receiving upside. Mm-hmm. But the question that you should ask in the middle rounds for any of these running backs is there a path, or would you be surprised if Darius Guice ended up being a semi workhorse or somewhat of a workhorse this year? And I think all of us would answer, no, I wouldn't be shocked by that because We know that the kind of profile he had entering the league. We know the talent is there. And we know that backfield isn't very stacked. It's not like they have that. I mean, again, we're talking about a guy who's 54 years younger than the other running back in that backfield for early down work. So I think there's a lot to like about Guice, just given the cost. If Guice were being drafted in the 4th round, no, we wouldn't be drafting him because there's a lot of risk there. But where he's being drafted, I think he's a good value.
Yeah, the risk reward profile here for him is really, really good. The next player that we want to talk about, Tevin Coleman, running back 41 right now, 100 ADP of around 100 or 101. Okay, overall. So why don't you talk about Tevin Coleman, because he's somebody who's been very in vogue of late with the Mostert news trade demand. Hey, give me $1 more million. Like, they could just take that out of like the little coin thing that they have at like food trucks, right? Oh, you want another $1.5 million? Here, just get on the field.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like, can't they just reward him for what he did last year too, down the stretch for them? Like, just give him the money and
give him the $1 million and go on with your day.
Yeah, I agree, man. And I'm firmly in the running backs aren't that important camp into real football, but I also want those guys to get paid because they deserve to. But yeah, so I was into Tevin Coleman before any of the Raheem Mostert news dropped. I just think that the gap in ADP between the two doesn't make a ton of sense. Now, to go back to what I was talking about before, I did that study on breakout running backs, and one of the things was that there's a disproportionate amount of targets versus attempts at these running backs that end up far exceeding ADP in the middle and late round C. And with Tevin Coleman, Raheem Mostert, a big knock for him is absolutely the receiving work, right? So he wasn't used heavily as a receiver last year. He only had 2 games with a double-digit percentage target share. He only had 3 with a 9% target share or higher. Tevin Coleman, though, he had 9 games with a 9% target share or higher. Then he had 4 more where it was 10% or higher. So Tevin Coleman is the pass-catching running back of the two, if you were to choose one. Jerick McKinnon's there. That could be a little bit scary. But just looking at Raheem Mostert versus Tevin Coleman, Coleman's the guy that you would want to target as a pass catcher. The thing that people seem to forget when it comes to recency bias with Raheem Mostert, we look at the Super Bowl and we look at especially that game against Green Bay in the NFC Championship. The game before that, the divisional round against Minnesota, Tevin Coleman was by far the RB1 in that offense in that game. He went nuts in that game. He had a couple touchdowns. He ran for over 100 yards. But then in that Green Bay game, he hurt his shoulder. And then if you recall, he almost didn't even play the Super Bowl. So I do think that when you're projecting this backfield, it should probably be a little bit more split than the way some people are breaking it out, because they're looking down the stretch last year. They're seeing what Raheem Mostert did, even in the regular season down the stretch a little bit. But a lot of that was buoyed by touchdowns. A lot of Mostert's fantasy production was buoyed by touchdowns. And then, like I said, he hasn't been really the receiving back or a receiving back so far in this brief. I mean, he's a 27-year-old breakout, so it's a very, very strange profile for Mostert. So I'm really betting on a few things here. I'm betting on Tevin Coleman being more heavily used as a pass catcher of the two. I'm betting on the offense because we know they were first in fantasy points scored last year. And then I'm betting on the scheme, obviously, with Kyle Shanahan. I'm also betting on the fact that Kyle Shanahan, even if we think Tevin Coleman is just a guy at this point, Kyle Shanahan loves him some Tevin Coleman. He likes Tevin Coleman.
He's going to take him everywhere with him. No matter what team he's coaching, right. He's going to take him to the Hamptons in the summers. He's going to go to Vegas with him. Like, for every bachelor party, Tevin Coleman's invited.
Right. That's right. Yeah. He's like a child to him, apparently. But yeah, so I think all of that just makes sense to sort of shrink that ADP between the two guys and target just the cheaper of the two. And the other thing too, within that breakout running back study that I did, is that you should be targeting ambiguous backfields. And by the ambiguous backfields, I mean the guys who broke out, they were rarely handcuffs. So they weren't just guys who, they were backing up a round 1 or 2 guy in fantasy drafts. They were guys who were the number 2 running backs on teams where the number 1 running back was usually drafted in round 5. That's almost exactly what's going on in San Francisco. So I'm going to take the cheaper guy. I think Coleman's a decent value. I think he's just one of those guys that has a chance pretty easily to outperform expectation, outperform ADP, which is what he's generally done aside from last year throughout his career. And then if something were to happen to Mostert, or if they just let Tevin Coleman be the guy, then all of a sudden he'd give you like 3rd or 4th round value.
Now you mentioned breakout running backs. You did this on one of your late round podcasts. Great episode. Go download it everywhere you can listen to podcasts and go check this whole thing out. Do you want to touch on, or do you want me to just touch on the 4 different trends that you had mentioned?
I don't know if I don't know if I remember.
Look at you. You're like an accountant. Like as soon as you're done with that tax paperwork, you're done. It's out of the head. I'm not remembering.
No, I think I can remember it. I think I remember it.
Okay, it was not handcuffs. That team did not have a running back picked in the top 24. So no running back with an ADP of 24 or higher. The second running back taken on their own team. They were all pass catchers. And breakouts come from all ages. So unlike wide receivers, which we'll get to in another video, so please subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell because that wide receiver video is coming soon. It doesn't matter how old they are. You mentioned Mostert as a 27-year-old breakout, and there's guys that are 22-year-old breakouts. It's more tied to opportunity and volume than it is to age, like a position like wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if there's a tiebreaker, if you're looking at like the ambiguity of a rookie and the upside of a rookie, the intensity might be there a little bit at running back and the age profile, but it's not nearly as strong as what I saw with wide receivers.
Right. Obviously, younger players are going to be a little bit more spry.
Sure.
Unless their name is Frank Gore, and then you just stay spry.
Right.
So your next running back, speaking of young, spry running backs, Keyshawn Vaughn with an RB running back. He's the running back 35 right now is where he's being drafted. ADP of 86. So a little bit higher than Tevin Coleman, but still in that right mid-round range that we're looking at. This is somebody you're going to have to convince me on because I'm not high on the running backs that are rookies this year. And that's complete 180 from last year when I was like buying all rookie running backs at ADP. Well, most of them. This year, I'm shying away because most of them have to fight for touches. They have to fight for volume. They have to fight to get on the field. Some of them aren't really good at pass protection. And they all seem to be coming in at an inflated ADP. Now, RB35, not an inflated ADP. So I'm with you on the position that he's being drafted. I'm with you on the price, talking about Keyshawn Vaughn and why he's attractive to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think sure, of course. He's a very handsome man though.
Yeah.
So one thing I will say with let's just say DeAndre Swift went to Tampa Bay.
Right.
If DeAndre Swift went to Tampa Bay, he'd probably be like a 3rd round pick in fantasy, right? In redrafts right now. Mm-hmm. Right. But Keyshawn Vaughn, who to me was a very solid prospect. He's sort of a jack of all trades, master of none, but very, very solid. Keyshawn Vaughn, you know, if we are to believe, and we should to a degree, that running backs aren't super, super important, and teams talk and money talks. We've seen this happen. You know, even Derrick Henry's contract wasn't that lucrative for what he's perceived to do. Mm-hmm. Then we should assume that the running back position is somewhat replaceable. So why would there be such a giant gap between DeAndre Swift there versus Keyshawn Vaughn there? And it has everything to do with the opportunity that's being presented, and then people just not liking Keyshawn Vaughn, the player. And so to me, I don't think Keyshawn Vaughn is that bad of a prospect or a player. I mean, he had the 2nd highest final season reception share of every running back in this year's class. And it was a good running back class, by the way. Mm-hmm. So the only running back who had a higher final season reception share percentage of team receptions was Eno Benjamin. So Keyshawn Vaughn enters with that receiving profile. And that's really, really key. If you look at quotes from Bruce Arians and things that the Tampa Bay staff was saying in February at the combine and then entering the draft, is they wanted a 3-down guy. And they wanted someone who can catch passes out of the backfield, because what they've had with Ronald Jones is not that. Ronald Jones has been a clear early down, good runner. I'm nothing against Ronald Jones. I actually don't think he's that bad of an early down runner. But he hasn't been that effective through the air. That's been a consistent knock on Ronald Jones, not just in the NFL, but it dates back to his days in college, where his receiving profile was really, really weak entering the NFL, and that just continued. And so I think all of that combined, you know, we're looking at a situation where if we knew that Keyshawn Vaughn was going to be the primary receiving back in a Tom Brady offense, if we knew that for sure, he would be at least a 5th round pick, at least. And then on top of that, what I'm saying is, if you think that Keyshawn Vaughn is at least an average prospect, I think that you should think that he's a value. If you just don't like Keyshawn Vaughn as a prospect, you don't think he's going to work, that's fine. That's your analysis, and that's the way that you view this player. But I'm way more open to just generally being wrong about player evaluation, because it's really, really hard to prospect these guys properly, especially the running back position, where you know, situation matters so much. So I'm buying into Vaughn because of that ambiguity. And you know, we've seen a sample with Ronald Jones where he's been fine, but he hasn't been that. He's not that impressive. He's not that great of a pass catcher. We definitely know that. And so I think all of those points just combined make Keyshawn Vaughn an intriguing value in the middle rounds.
And their ADPs are quite similar. Like after the draft, as you guys can see on the screen, Keyshawn Vaughn's ADP shot up way higher than Ronald Jones by like 10 to 20 picks. And then all of a sudden, that's kind of normalized in the last 30 days where now Ronald Jones is being picked ahead of Keyshawn Vaughn, which is why it makes him a little bit more of a value currently, no matter when you're drafting. And I know that a lot of people, when they're drafting friends and family leagues, let's say, they're drafting like 3 days before the season starts. To me, everybody's got all the information at that point, and there's way less value to be had at a price. If you're somebody like me who drafts basically throughout the offseason from like June, July until all the way up until the final day, and most of what I play is best ball, obviously. I'll play a couple of transactional leagues, but because of how much work I do on content and during DFS season where I'm playing tens of thousands of dollars every weekend, like I'm not going to focus on my $200 league over here. So I just don't do those anymore. I'll play best ball leagues where I don't have to manage them. If we find out that Keyshawn Vaughn, let's say in the next 20 days from right now, and we're recording on July the 20th, if sometime through camp it becomes apparent that Ronald Jones has fallen out of favor and Keyshawn Vaughn is going to be the 65% snap guy, this ADP is going to skyrocket from where it sits right now at 86, somewhere into the 50s, where you're getting somebody like, like we mentioned, Devin Singletary earlier. So if you're drafting now, if you're playing best ball leagues, no matter where it is that you're playing them, if you project that he's going to win this job outright, then now is the time for value on Keyshawn Vaughn.
Yeah, the other thing to think about too is if we hear news that favors one of these running backs, which running back do you think is going to shoot higher in ADP between the two guys? It's definitely going to be Keyshawn Vaughn because we've seen what Ronald Jones does and is for the most part. He can improve, sure, but this is third year in the league and he was very inefficient year one. People are going to have question marks with Ronald Jones. So essentially what you're doing is you can buy both of them. That's fine. But I think that there's more value to be gained by drafting Keyshawn Vaughn.
Right. I mean, that always happens with rookies, right? We don't know how bad they are yet.
Yeah.
Right. We just don't. And like, I don't mean to say that like to be mean to NFL football players. They're obviously some of the greatest athletes in the world and are great at what they do. But like, you know what Ronald Jones is. You know the ceiling on Ronald Jones. He isn't going to suddenly become LaDainian Tomlinson. That ain't happening. But like, people will dream about a rookie. I don't know if Keyshawn Vaughn wins this job. Like he could be Marshall Faulk. Prove me wrong that he's not Marshall Faulk. Like they take that outlandish view with these huge ceilings for rookies, and that really pushes them high up the ADP charts. Just kind of like you're saying. I usually keep these to 5 picks, but JJ wanted to talk about somebody else, and I thought that he was a very interesting pick, so I'm going to let him bring him up. Darryl Henderson on the Rams, running back 48 right now, ADP of 121, almost 122. A lot of people are on that Cam Akers train. Talk to me about Darryl Henderson.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm on the Cam Akers train to a degree too, right? This is clearly and just an obvious value play right now, and it's a cost-related play. You know, I've done research and studies on what happens to players, wide receivers and running backs in particular, that don't do anything during their rookie season, and if there's not a clear reason as to why they didn't do anything, those guys rarely go on to have RB1, wide receiver 1 type careers. Darryl Henderson fits that mold for the most part. You know, there's not that much reason as to why Darryl Henderson didn't see the field more last year. That's somewhat of a concern. But I do find it interesting that last year, Darryl Henderson was like a round 6 pick throughout. I mean, people were really, really high on Darryl Henderson last year because of all the Todd Gurley issues. But, you know, Todd Gurley is now gone. And now Darryl Henderson's like a double-digit round guy after, you know, not really seeing much from him in year one. I do think we're going to see a committee in LA. I would still favor Cam Akers, so don't take me saying that to draft Darryl Henderson as he's the better pick of the two straight up. I just think that Henderson's the better value right now. The better.
It's an ADP gap pick for you here. Instead of paying the price to get Cam Akers, which is around a 5th round pick right now, you're saying that you'd rather take Darryl Henderson in the 10th, which is you're saying I'm risking less draft equity. You can take a wide receiver who's still a stud in that range in the 5th round, like an actual stud wide receiver in that range, and maybe come out with a major profit as a 10th rounder on Darryl Henderson.
Yeah, I mean, look, would we be shocked if we walk away from the season and Darryl Henderson had more work than Cam Akers did? I don't think so. I don't think it would be that shocking. And Darryl Henderson was not a bad prospect at all. He was actually a good prospect. If you look at one of the metrics that I love to look at is yards per team attempt or team play at the running back position. So how many yards this running back had, both receiving and rushing, divided by the total number of plays that team ran. Darryl Henderson, it's a very predictive metric too for running backs as they transition from college to the NFL. Darryl Henderson, of the last 2 draft class, the only running back with a better mark within that statistic during their final season was Jonathan Taylor. That's it. Darryl Henderson was not a bad prospect at all. He just had a really bad rookie season, which can happen. And we don't see these guys generally rebound in a super sphere way, but we also are talking about an offense that we've seen guys thrive in this Sean McVay offense and seen running backs thrive. They tend to run the ball a lot close to the goal line, which is obviously helpful. I just think there's a lot of things playing into a guy like Darryl Henderson's favor. And the gap between him and Akers probably shouldn't be as large as it is.
Right. It's like a 70 pick gap right now.
It's huge. Yeah.
Well, JJ, that's a lot of running backs. We just gave these guys 6 different running backs in the mid range that give you value at ADP and give you a possibility if one thing happens that these guys could turn into league winners. Guys, go check out JJ on Twitter at Late Round QB. Go listen to his multiple podcasts, the Late Round podcast and Living the Stream podcast, both must listens before and during the season. JJ, thank you for joining me. For the rest of you guys, thank you for being here. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you ring that notifications bell and look out for other videos like this one over here.
He's a legend.